Hello, and thank you for asking me to record this session on mind, body, and soul. My name is Dr. Rob Waller, and I'm a consultant psychiatrist working for the National Health Service in Edinburgh, and I'm also one of the directors of the Mind and Soul Foundation. Now, the Mind and Soul Foundation has been an online presence on the internet for 10 to 15 years. It's the largest repository of Christian mental health information there is. And we've got three main aims. One is to try and deliver sessions like this to help people understand mental health and the various issues that surround it. The other is to equip people in their own journeys. They could be struggling with their own long-term mental health problems, or just going through a more difficult time themselves, or be trying to work with people who are struggling themselves. And also to encourage people, to encourage those faith communities to engage with the topic of mental health, and to encourage people that they are not alone in this. Now, the Mind and Soul website has got over 1,000 articles, so it's quite a big website to start off with, but you probably will find something there. If you go and search under the search button, you'll find pretty much anything there. And sessions like this can sometimes leave us with more questions than actual answers, so we would encourage you to go and have a look there afterwards. But if you want a slightly more bite-sized website to look at, we've collaborated with a few other organizations to create something called the Mental Health Access Pack, which is 20 or so well-crafted and well-presented articles that you can also download as PDFs to print or share, and they can be great places to start your discussion if you want something slightly more manageable. Now, in this session today, I want to try and go through three main areas. The first is perhaps to think about the context in which mental health problems occur. The second thing is to think about how we might cope with mental health problems, or work with people who've got significant mental health difficulties on a day-to-day basis, and also to think about how we can create positive mental health structures for both ourselves and those we work with going forward. Now, these are the Banana Flats in Leith. This is just down the road from the clinic building in which I work. And these are famous perhaps for being in the film Trainspotting. And I'm aware that many people watching this video are going to be working on similar kinds of estates or blocks of council flats, which at one level can be amazing, that there are amazing aspects of community and love and care within these flats, but they can also be very challenging with significant unreached and undiagnosed mental illness, quite significant addiction problems, or the consequences of people with quite challenging personalities. However, what we know is that people continue to look towards faith groups and the church for help when they're struggling with their mental health. This is a picture from the third step of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's painted by a Glasgow artist. The first step is to say I'm an alcoholic. The second step is to say I cannot help myself. And the third step is to turn yourself over to a higher power of some kind. And here he is coming out from underneath the tombstone, looking not up towards the higher power, which is there centrally placed up in heaven or some similar kind of place, but looking towards the local church. And when people are struggling with their health, they do seek help, existential help about bigger issues. They do want to talk about spirituality, and certainly that's my consistent experience, is people want to talk about matters of faith and spirituality when they are struggling with their mental health, because it brings an element of meaning that perhaps the pure biology of psychiatry sometimes struggles to do. And it might be the local church, it might be a non-church organization, or an organization like an Eden community that perhaps doesn't meet regularly in a building, but people still know that is where faith lives, and that is the place that I want to go and explore and talk to. And if we can have faith communities and churches that are ready to address the topic of mental illness, then that is a great way for people to have a reason to come along, to find a way to get connected. Now, we do need to be careful. And this verse, Matthew 10, verse 16, is one of the verses that I keep coming back to in this kind of work. It's obviously talking about a particular time in the gospel story, but what Jesus is saying here is he's sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, people who at some level are vulnerable, and that there are wolves out there. But he doesn't say, don't go out, or go out and get eaten. What he says is have this dual perspective. I want you to be as shrewd as serpents on one hand and as innocent as doves on the other hand. And what that means is that we are shrewd. We know the tough situations. We know the times when we're going to need help. We know the times when we're going to be finding ourselves out of her depth. But we're also as innocent as doves, which is we're choosing to believe the best in people, to believe that most people actually just want to get by or just want to get better and are not out to deliberately manipulate or try to hurt us. So we've got that dual perspective. And I think if we can walk that line, being both shrewd with one hand and innocent with the other, that sort of wisdom will help us in the long term of ministry to be ongoing living sacrifices rather than charging in and ending up as burnt offerings, because we go in there trusting that everything's going to be okay because we prayed about it, therefore everything's going to be okay, isn't it? And we are too innocent perhaps in that situation, too relaxed, too trusting. It's that balance between shrewdness and innocence which is going to get us through. And at that intersection actually lies an opportunity to network and come together. Mental health services, I think many people would agree, are out of their depth, both in terms of the waiting times, the long waits, which have only got worse during the pandemic. Also, many social factors, which, yes, they cause mental distress and unhappiness, but they shouldn't be medicalized. There is no pill to fix a housing problem. What you need is a housing solution of some kind. And mental health services are also out of their depth with that spiritual perspective, not because they're anti-mental health. In actual fact, many of them are actually fairly pro people using their spirituality in their own recovery journey and knowing the importance of that, but they don't explicitly have that spiritual perspective. Likewise, faith-based organizations are out of their depth in terms of the training and the expertise they have. We've been studying the brain, well, for centuries in various different ways, but explicitly, perhaps starting with Freud and Charcot and people like that at the end of the 18th century for the last 100 years or so. And we have got good, deep understanding of the brain now. We know how it works. We know why it does certain things. We don't necessarily know the big whys about why are we here and things like that, because those are questions for faith. But we know an awful lot about why humans behave in the way that they do and how the brain can become disordered. So we should draw on that expertise and that training. Also, the NHS is there to provide inpatient care, those times of particular distress where the person needs more support than any local church will be able to provide. And generally speaking, we don't see churches running hospitals, and I think nor should we. To run a psychiatric hospital or an intensive care setup is extremely expensive and requires almost the backing of government to deliver those kinds of things, certainly in this country. And also, not everybody wants a faith perspective. So if we're going to help somebody with their mental health problems, we can't just be thinking about a spiritual solution. We need to be thinking about working with other kinds of people for social solutions, biological solutions, psychological solutions. And when we get those two coming together, when we get the mind and the soul coming together, perhaps that's when we realize that actually the word "and" is the most important word in this situation. It's why we call it the mind and soul foundation. And with those networks between faith communities, between mental health services, we can have partnerships that can deliver services, can deliver support, can deliver supervision, and helping each other. So that the faith-based organization could be helping the other organizations understand people's spirituality, and they could be helping the faith-based organization deal with some of the more difficult mental health problems. And increasingly, in terms of delivering services, there are less and less strings attached. So there's less of a need to sort of say, oh, you must leave Jesus at the door. People are not saying that anymore. People are still going to say, you mustn't abuse your position and be aggressive in your evangelism. But they understand that faith-based communities want to bring faith to the table, are faith-based in what they do and how they think. There's a great organization here in Edinburgh where I work called Bethany, which works largely with homeless people. It is both delivering wide range of services, many of which are funded by the council or by housing benefit, but also is explicitly faith-based in what they do. And if we can do that, if we can value the unique experience between each other, I think that's really helpful. and really creative. So let's spend a little bit of time just thinking about coping. How do we cope with our own mental health difficulties? How do we cope when the rising tide, the hidden tsunami of mental health from the pandemic seems to be coming towards us? One of the things we need to try and do is not sort of spot or label mental health difficulties. You know, oh, that person over there, they've got an addiction problem, or that person, I can tell by looking at them somehow that they've got schizophrenia or something like this, because I can tell you, having been doing this for 20, 30 years, that is not possible. Any one of the people in this cartoon could be a self-harmer. Are they the doctor? Are they the punk rocker? You know, perhaps the more classic person. Is it the nurse? Is it the soldier? Any of these people can self-harm, because you cannot see mental illness. You can sometimes see the consequences of mental illness, perhaps side effects of medication, or the effects of a downward social slide and homelessness and unemployment. But you can't tell by looking what is going on inside someone's head. And you may be quite surprised by what you find when you actually talk to people. And the good news there is that we can raise this as a topic of conversation with everybody. You know, you've heard of perhaps the figure 1 in 4 people will have a mental health problem that leads them to take time off work at some point in their life, or 1 in 100 people will be admitted to a psychiatric hospital with a psychotic episode at some point in their life. These things are not rare, and they should be things that we should be discussing on a regular basis. Now, one of the reasons they're not discussed is sometimes it feels as though everyone's got an axe to grind. And when we think about the cause, we often have our favorite thing. So, you know, if you're into biology and science, you might say, oh, it's a brain cell problem. If you're into social cohesion and community, you might say, oh, it's all about loneliness and isolation, bottom left. Or Carl Rogers there, the picture, bottom right, the founder of humanistic therapy or person-centered therapy, it might say it's just because people haven't had enough chance to express themselves, to feel heard and valued. Or is it a spiritual solution where there's either the sin or some sort of spiritual entrapment, or the result of the fall is going on? And when we think about the cause, that leads us to automatically think about our own favorite solution. Is it a pill? Is it a community group? Is it a therapy session, or is it prayer or healing of some kind? And the problem is, when all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and you go around trying to bang in the various different nails. And sometimes that works, sometimes the nail goes in fine, but sometimes you need a screwdriver. Sometimes you need a pair of pliers to pull it out. Sometimes you need to fold the nail over, put some soft cloth over it, and pretend it's not there. And actually, when we bring all these things together, when we can say, do you know what, yeah, medication might be a good idea. By all means, pray at all times in all things. Of course, we want people to have community around them. And yes, if it's a recurrent problem, probably actually talking to someone about it probably is a good idea. And we can bring all these things together to understand how best to help both our own mental health situation and that of those around us. Whereas if we put all our eggs in one basket and say, I'm going to take that pill, it's going to sort me out, or I got prayed for last week, why aren't I better? Then we fall into the trap of oversimplifying things, over-medicalizing, over-spiritualizing, etc. One of the things that we've done quite a lot of over the last 6 to 12 months is really increase the amount of support we're trying to give out through social media. We've got a dedicated social media coordinator who makes everything look very pretty, which is fantastic. And this is our Instagram page. And the handle there is, /Mind and Soul UK, or @Mind and Soul UK, depending on the platform, be it Twitter or Facebook or Instagram and all the others. And what we've tried to do is we've tried to get an encouragement out there every Monday. We've tried to answer the question, what's going on in my head? Is it this? Is it that? The little arguments that we have with itself. Is there some sort of encouragement? We try and get an article out on the website every week, which we'll then share onwards through social media. And the articles range right from testimonies, songs and poetry, in-depth, more academic sort of educational articles. So please do have a dig through the social media, follow us, and we want so much to help you if you'll let us do that. And there's also a great course that's come out from Sanctuary Mental Health Ministries. So sanctuarymentalhealth.org, if you go to that, you can get access to their free online course. It's completely free. It's beautifully presented. It was a paid course initially, and then they decided to make it free during the pandemic. And it covers a whole bunch of topics, as you can see on the screen there. But it's everything through from perhaps, understanding mental health, but also to think about your own mental health, think about self-care, think about stigma, something to discuss. You can just do one module or a bunch of modules, and there's all sorts of supporting materials around that. So if you're serious about taking mental health ministry or your own mental health forward, please do have a look at the Sanctuary Mental Health resources. And lastly, how can we create? How can we think about proactively trying to produce? Sometimes it is just coping, but as perhaps we come out from lockdown, think what are the good habits that we can put in both in ourselves and in our own organization? And one of those you might want to think about is a model or some models. You might be familiar with scripture, but really think about where they fit in. So on the right, you've got the fivefold ministry idea that there might be an apostolic leader, an evangelist, teacher, prophet. But, is there a pastor? Is there someone whose natural tendency in a group situation is to look out for the little guy, is to have that ability to spot the person who perhaps needs a quiet word or a kind shoulder? Are they someone who perhaps can be specifically supported and empowered to do that? Or the Old Testament model of prophet, priest, and king, which we see coming together in a healthy nation, and we see coming together in Jesus. But in the Old Testament, there were three separate roles. The king was the logistic administrator, the prophet was the visionary who brought the word, but the priest was the person who cared for people, who had that sort of pastoral eye there. And again, if you're thinking in any small group, you should be thinking, well, who is the leader? Who is the teacher? Who is the administrator? Who loves a good spreadsheet and doing the weekly email? Goodness me, what a gift that is. But also, who is the priest? Who is going to care for this group? And actually having that sort of pastoral network throughout the organization. You might have a leadership network, you might have an email cascade. Who is your pastoral network that you can discuss things in your smaller groups, but also have a way to escalate, I guess is the right word, more significant concerns. Also, you might want to go out there and get some training. Now, we talked about the Sanctuary course, but another fantastic course to do, which I think is actually really helpful if you're working in often quite deprived areas, is mental health first aid. You might have heard a little bit about, the police starting to carry naloxone for people who've taken opiate overdoses. Naloxone's an opiate blocker and can rescue people who are taking an overdose or an accidental overdose and are in respiratory depression. And mental health first aid will teach you how to recognize those signs and symptoms. It's just like physical first aid, except it's mental health first aid. This is Scotland's mental health first aid, but there's a mental health first aid for England, etc., etc. And you can find a course near you. You could even run a course within your group and invite people from the local community to do that in the same way that you might want to run a first aid course for your community as well. So that's a really practical way to learn about this, particularly the sort of mental health emergencies. How do you deal with someone who's suicidal? How do you deal with someone who is psychotic? This is the course that will tell you. We've also written a manager's guide, and I've put a short link on it on our website, mindandsoulfoundation.org/manager, and it will take you to an article which is particularly focused about how to line manage situations where there are mental health difficulties. Someone's taken more than just a little bit of time off work, or actually, how could you embed good mental health principles in your organization? So this might be more appropriate perhaps for the managers and leaders within the Eden Network. Christians Against Poverty have done some absolutely fantastic work in this, and we've worked with them on that. So for example, explicitly in their staff policy, it says that you're allowed a number of duvet days each year, where you don't have to give a reason. You can just say, I'm taking a duvet day for my own mental health. And it's just like being sick if you've got flu or something like that. It's just the mental health equivalent of that. Also, the importance of discussing mental health at every PDP, every review, every you have your quarterly review or your yearly review, and mental health should be on the topic as an item for conversation, again, so people know it's going to be discussed. Whereas if it's not on the list of things to discuss, They're worried about sort of putting their paw up at the end and thinking, can I discuss this? Is this the right place to discuss it? I'm not sure who to talk to. So let's get it out there. Let's raise awareness is perhaps the first place. You know, I know that Eden are good people who want to work with as many people as they can do. We're not going to be writing people off because they appear to be weak because of mental health problems. We want to try and make adaptations, allowances as much as possible. And if you want to dig a little bit more deeper into this, there's actually some resources that we recorded with Eden back in 2012. And yes, I know I looked a lot younger back then, but we recorded these almost 10 years ago and made a DVD. And unfortunately, sessions 4 and 5 have been lost in the mists of time somewhere, but the videos are still available for session 1, 2, and 3. We've digitized them, put them on our YouTube channel. And if you go to mindandsoulfoundation.org/Eden, you can watch those. And so there's some round tables with the 3 of us from Mind and Soul, and also 3 of the Eden staff talking about some of these topics. And the session notes for numbers 4 and 5 are still there, even if you've lost the beautiful video of us talking. And one thing, again, this is a resource perhaps more aimed at physical churches that meet on a Sunday, but thinking, what does it mean to be a mental health friendly church or mental health friendly organization, rather than just saying, well, we assume we are, you know, actually proactively thinking, yes, we are going to set out to be mental health friendly. This one here, you know, are you able to signpost local services? Do you know what's going on? So if someone turns up and they're suicidal, or you know, that you know what the local routes are, because there will be routes, there will be local crisis centres and care pathways, and you know, people should know that. They should maybe keep a link on their phone or a card in their wallet so they can access those things. Have you got a pastoral care policy or a pastoral care strategy? That idea I spoke about earlier with the prophet, priest, and king, that you've got that sort of pastoral network. So this area is dealt with here, and then if it needs to be discussed with the wider senior team, then it goes there, and so on. And you know, when is something a child protection issue? When is something an adult protection issue? When does it need to be shared with the executive team, etc.? These are all things that you ought to have thought out before it happens. And we've got a sample pastoral care strategy on our website that you can search for and download and make use of. So just to finish for me, thank you so much. It's been great to talk to you about mind, body, and soul, the context in which it all happens, how we can cope perhaps on a day-to-day basis, and also perhaps how we can construct and create mental health friendly environments in our organizations. Thank you so much, and I wish you all the best for the rest of your conference.